Kia ora koutou, ko Colin McLeod Takalinga. I'm the Director of the National Centre of Religious Studies. And I just want to acknowledge, before Laurel and Jeanette show you their wonderful material, their amazing work. We're really blessed at NCRS to have these two people working in the secondary area of the curriculum and helping with the curriculum overall. Also, I just want to point out that the material that's been shown is not available at the time of this video being made. But the idea is that we can show you where we're heading. So to allay some fears, perhaps, and to hopefully enthuse you about what is going to be coming your way. And there will be certainly opportunities for dialogue as the material comes online. So we'll just begin now with our prayer. He horere he karoria ki te atua, he mangarongo ke te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Honour and glory to God, peace upon the earth, and goodwill to all people. And just before I pass on to Laurel, apologies for some of the quality of the material. Most of it's excellent, but there's a few spots where the gear has let us down.
Kia ora, my name's Laurel Lana, and I'm one of the resource creators for NCRS, along with several others. Jeanette Atabella will also be introducing some of her work today. Today, what the idea is that we will have a bit of a discussion about PL4 RE. So PL4 is Phasal Learning 4, and that covers years 9 and 10. So here we've got something that hopefully you've already looked at from the curriculum document. It's the page that has the whole scheme for PL4. It's 2 years worth of work that you've got here. So you've got the themes running down and the cross themes running across, and then you'll find that there are some achievement objectives that are general to the area. You'll see that there are 8 achievement objectives. Now, these are obligatory. We want all of those achievement objectives to be tackled. The achievement objective number 9 at the bottom is for the school. It can be looked at in religious education classes, but it's intended to sort of almost tie together what the students are doing in religious education classes with a general sort of sense of journey with the whole school. So this may look a bit maybe forbidding, 8 objectives, but this is 2 years worth of work that we're looking at here. Now, when you look at the particular PL4 and you decided to have a look at the individual content areas, you will get an overview of that content area. So the overview holds the achievement objectives, and then it gives a breakdown of the achievement objective into learning intentions. Now, these are learning intentions that we feel best expand on the achievement objective, that they're giving you a direction in which we want you to take that achievement objective. So the achievement objectives are obligatory. We're expecting that everybody will tackle every achievement objective, but the learning intentions are our take on that. Now, you can adjust those learning intentions if you want to, and of course you don't need to do them all, but if you don't do them all, are you still covering that achievement objective? So those are our suggested learning intentions. Now, next to that, you have possible progress indicators. Now, in primary school, they have success criteria. Success criteria to me sort of implies a little bit that there's a failure. Now, we didn't really want to go there, and we've made suggestions of possible progress indicators that are a bit, we're hoping will be a bit more realistic, that they'll reach a differentiated classroom a bit better, that they'll give people different ideas of where kids are at without actually saying this child has not achieved or this young person has not achieved. So they're to give progress indications, but they're also there just as ideas for learning, ideas for formative assessment, even ideas for summative assessment sometimes. In the next column, possible teaching and learning experiences. We have in some places put those in, but on different document. But I've left this column here because it may be useful for you to put down your own ideas. Now, getting back to those possible progress indicators, they are not compulsory. They're just ideas that we feel may be useful to you. So there is a breakdown of each achievement objective. Now you'll see at the end of that first sentence of the achievement objective, there is in brackets set A. That brings us to a very important point. How are you going to cover all these objectives in 2 years? Well, we decided to try to break down those objectives into achievable and coherent learning packs, or learning units of work, sorry, I should say. So there at the top, you've got the overall name of the content area, and then you've got set A, and it's been broken into 4 achievement objectives for each one, and set B is similar. Now, for phase of learning 4, it was quite easy to equally split the achievement objectives. It just happened to work out that way. In the phase of learning 3, and in some other places, it doesn't always work out 4-4. Sometimes you get an achievement objective which needs developing. So it's introduced in 1 year and then developed to a greater depth in the following year. Now, we have, in our minds, we have designed this to be set A would be taught first and set B would be taught second. And realistically, we're looking at year 9, set A, year 10, set B. That's how we've written our material, and with the understanding that the set A knowledge will be prior to the set B knowledge. Now, you do not have to teach it like that. That's up to you. You may decide, for instance, that in year 9, you're going to do all of Tātou and you're going to do all of Te Rongopai. And then in year 10, you'll do the remaining 2. That's quite possible. And that still keeps the progression of ideas together. But if you're thinking about mixing it up over different years, integrating it, you'll need to really think about how you do that. You can still use our resources, but you might find that they'll need to be adjusted. Now, of course, you do not need to divide the objectives into these sets at all. That's totally up to you. But that's how we, as imagining ourselves as being back in front of the class, how are we going to plan it? This seemed to be. So what you've got to consider is, are you going to go with the NCRS groupings as we've presented them, or are you going to integrate, which we know that many schools are now doing? So one of the things to think about is, can you prioritise the RE topics for integration? Do you have in your school some power to say that these are so important that we need to consider making sure that if we're integrating, that these get a fair hearing? So how are you going to do that? How are you going to ensure all achievement objectives are met in an integrated program? This can be tricky. And, I've had experience with one school who decided to integrate year 7 to 9 across all subject areas, including RE. They had already decided what the main topics for the years were going to be before they decided to integrate religious education into it. It became very difficult. To integrate religious education well. In some places it was okay, doing the creation material from the old curriculum in year 9, they could easily bring that down to year 7. But in other places, it was very difficult. And so I think, and then they were having the problem of having to teach isolated achievement objectives because they didn't really fit anywhere. And so you have a sort of almost out of context achievement objective that sort of just sat away on its own. So you really need to think about an integrated program and make sure that religious education is not a tack on, that it's really part of the planning right from the beginning. And there's some great topics in RE that lend themselves to being able to produce some really good stuff for English, even for science. The ancient cultures thing fits well with social studies. There's a whole lot that can be done, and I think the job is to get other members of your school excited about RE possibilities. So, can we adapt the level of maturity and difficulty of the resources NCRS has provided? So we have assumed certain things be taught at certain levels. So you will need to make sure that if you are integrating, for example, with year 7 to say 10, material for 14 and 15-year-olds is obviously not going to be that suitable, some of it for 10, 11-year-olds. So you've got to be able to adjust that. And you may decide you want to write your own learning intentions and your own units altogether. So that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But it's quite a lot of work. And we really recommend that at least for the first year you engage with our material first so that you become familiar with the direction in which it should take, and then you can start to break out into your own material. So we're assuming that you've decided to go with the sets and resources NCRS has provided. So I will look at the creation and covenant material just to give you an example of what I've been working on, and Jeanette Aotearoa will be looking at the Trinity, which is what she's been working on. So when you first open up the pack for, the content material for covenant, creation and covenant, you'll get a suggested learning sequence. So this document gives you how many packs have been created. So in this case, there have been 9 packs and what the topic of those packs are. And I've abbreviated this to fit on a slide, but there are bullet points to break down what the content of those packs are underneath. There are also, it explains which objectives are being met and which learning intentions are being met in each pack. You'll also notice there that there's a lesson weighting. The lesson weighting is to give you a rough idea of the proportion of time that you'll need to spend on each pack. One pack does not necessarily equal one lesson. And of course, how much time you spend on these packs will very much depend on your own rangatahi, where they're at, what their needs are, and also what you think is the most important for them out of this material. So you might want to expand on something, you might want to reduce something else. And it will depend on the activities that you're choosing. So if you're choosing to do a project activity for stories of creation and a project activity for living the stories of creation in pack 9, you will obviously need more lessons for that, for those 2 packs than you will in other places. So you might want to reduce it in other places. It's fairly flexible. It's fairly flexible. Just looking at that, another comment I'd like to make is about the order of packs. So you'll see here, this one, there's an introductory one, that the Bible is a story of a relationship, then we've got covenants, God's commandments, creation, decreation, and then Jesus in the new covenant, and then the great commandment. And you may be thinking, well, why doesn't Jesus in the new covenant follow on from covenants? Why doesn't the great commandment follow on from God's commandments? This is an example of how hard it is to sometimes separate out concepts to teach because they're so interrelated. And I played around a lot with the order of this content area because it was really, really tricky. And you might find, this is what I decided would be best. So they look at covenants and commandments, and then they look at the stories of creation. So they look at the beginning of the Bible. And then they go back to these ideas of covenant and commandment. Now, you might think that's a bit odd. You can make up your own mind. You can teach it in any order you want. But again, we have created it with our understanding of what we would have already taught, so that the later packs will assume knowledge from the earlier packs. So if you are going to rearrange it, you'll need to check that, does that pack work as a standalone pack? Am I going to have to readjust it so that I make sure that all the knowledge needed has been covered for that to work? So what's in a pack? What do you get in a pack? You get basically three things. You get background notes, you get learning activities, and you get resources. So here's an example of the background notes. So this is the background notes for God's commandments. You get the achievement objective again, the learning intention for that particular pack. And then you'll see there is a brief note to the teacher about some aspects of the pack. So in this case, we're sort of acknowledging that there'll be some rangatahi who don't know much about Catholic teaching or the Bible. So just a little bit of advice there. Now, the background notes have been designed with teachers in mind, and with teachers who have maybe limited knowledge or are new to teaching RE. So we've tried to keep them short because we know that you don't have a lot of time. Sometimes that's not always possible. We've tried to keep them fairly simple. One of the reasons why we're trying to keep them simple is the idea is that if you wanted to cut and paste these to make student readings, you could do. Now that's not going to suit, especially at year 9, that's not necessarily going to suit all rangatahi, but you may find that you want to cut and paste little bits out of it to make a worksheet or whatever. So you will be able to do that. So this is sort of what they look like. Learning activities. Now this is the list of learning activities so far in the Stories of Creation pack. You'll see there the number and system. So 4 is phase of learning 4, 2 is content area, it's the second content area, which is Tarongapai, the biblical content area, set A, and then the last 4 is pack 4. So for this, obviously it's a biblical strand, you can't get away from reading, you've got to read. Yes, you could play YouTube clips for some of the stuff, but then you're not actually engaging with the proper text. Most of the YouTube clips do not rely on the actual text, and you really want them to be looking at the actual text, not just a sort of a cutesy portrayal of Adam and Eve in the garden in a cartoon. You want them to actually engage with what the text actually says. So you'll see there that the creation account 1, student reading, and it says ERV. I made 2 student readings. One is the easy to read version, ERV, and one is NRSV, which is the biblical version that is the best for teaching. It's the most accurate English translation of the original text. That's still not too overly complicated. But these are year 9s and literacy is an issue, and so the easy to read version is there. So the worksheet has got the actual text, and then there's a box for the students to draw a picture of what they're reading. So I made these because, for some students with low literacy, they may actually need the teacher or a friend to be reading it together with them. They might be doing this in groups where one person is reading, but they can draw a picture and it will help them remember what is in the text when they come back to look at it later. So then there's a reading responses. So there's a worksheets where a bit more like the old textbook, I guess, but they can be adjusted. So there's fill in the gaps material. There's things to help them think. There are activities. So these are some of the activities and reflections. So this is some of the material, just one example. It's perhaps not the most exciting, but I don't want you to get your hopes up too high about how exciting this is all going to be. So, this is one pack. There are all sorts of different activities. It's not all like this. They're not all just worksheets. There are other sorts of activities as well. And lots of suggestions for things like dramas and role plays and this and stuff. So this is just one example of one of the more wordy packs. So resources. Now the resources, whereas the learning activities are basically the things for the students, resources are for the teachers to use. So in the first one are learning suggestions. So again, you get what was in the overview at the top there, but you get other possible teaching and learning experiences suggested below. So some packs have a lot more than others. Some packs are easier than others. Some topics are easier than others. So that's not all consistent. There are ideas, often teaching ideas don't need a lot of extra things. They don't need bits of paper and they don't need fancy equipment. They're just suggestions about what you can do. Sometimes, as you'll see there at the bottom, it says brainstorm the Great Commandment, use the A3 group sheet provided in learning activities. So in this case, there was a sheet that was provided to do the activity. Sometimes on these learning suggestion pages, the whole activity is actually presented there as well. So there'll be something to photocopy. We're hoping this will be a live document. This is a document where, as we get ideas, as hopefully you feed ideas back to us, we can add those possible teaching and learning experiences to the list. So it will grow over time with your ideas, because ultimately Jeanette and I are two ordinary teachers. We do not have the final word on brilliant classroom activities. So we're hoping that your brilliant classroom activities will be added to this list. The other document you'll get is a page of links. So these are internet resources. They're mostly YouTube clips. Sometimes they will be documents and web pages. It sort of depends a bit on the topic. For biblical stuff, it's quite hard to get material that's basic enough, written material that's basic enough for students on the web. So there are YouTube clips. Now, some of these YouTube clips are great, and we've tried to add some comments underneath just to give you a bit of a guide. So you can see there some of the comments. Now, sometimes YouTube clips are not appropriate, and while we don't have hours and hours to sit and watch every single YouTube clip, you might find that we've included on these lists YouTube clips not to use. And that's because we've come across them and found something in them that we think is a problem for us. So quite often things start out looking really good, and it's happened to me many times. You start out watching something, oh, this is fantastic, and then you get more than halfway through and all of a sudden a clanger is dropped in some way, either theological or something just completely inappropriate. So we have commented on those. So not every single one, obviously, but where we've come across it, we've put those in there. There are some things like the Bible Project clips are absolutely fantastic. Most of them are really fantastic, but even they are not entirely compatible with some Catholic teaching, and so sometimes we've suggested that you cut clips out because you want to use some of it, but not all of it. So, you just have to be aware that just because something is about the Bible and it's on YouTube and it looks Christian, it's not necessarily compatible with what we want to teach. So those are the links. And then there is a PowerPoint. Now, the PowerPoints are the basic teaching resource. They act a wee bit as the textbook. They're what the packs are sort of built around, really. So the PowerPoints are really important. Now, they're PowerPoints that you can adapt and change. You can turn them into Google Slides. You can make them available for students, although we don't recommend you do that without teaching them first. So that's really where our main information will be found, and everything hinges around that, including the activities. So I'm just going to show you, the next few slides are from a PowerPoint that I made. So this is how they start. This pack is the Great Commandment pack. So you see there, Creation and Covenant 4.2a.7. Again, we get what we're learning. So they've looked at the 10 Commandments. They know that they are old. Can we ignore them? Do you agree? So some koutou around that. Are the 10 Commandments still relevant? Built-in chance to talk. And then they get a chance to go and do something. So where it says your turn on my PowerPoints, and it will be different for Jeanette's because we don't, we each do our own stuff, so they're not all the same. They will look different. And we think this is a good thing. We're different teachers, you're all different teachers, different styles of teaching suit different people. So, it's not all going to be the same. The PowerPoints are not all coordinated to look the same. And they don't even look ultra professional. They haven't been given one overall look. And that's because partly we know that students get a bit bored with overall looks, but we're all different people and different things appeal to different people. So that's how it works. So in this case, a question is asked. Now, this is one where there is a worksheet attached or an assignment to go away and explore something. So the students go away and explore what the laws are in New Zealand and how the 10 Commandments might fit. So they have to do a bit of thinking. So they've gone away, they've done some thinking, an activity that might take them 15, 20 minutes. They come back. So they've found out that actually only 3 of the 10 Commandments are against the law in New Zealand today. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So should all the 10 Commandments be law? So a bit of discussion. And then bringing it a bit closer to home, some thinking and some development of the ideas. So one of the criticisms I had last year when I did a bit of a roadshow around some Year 11 material that I'd made, and one of the comments was the PowerPoints were very wordy. And it was a fair criticism, especially in the history one. It was a very fair criticism. They are wordy. And that's because there's a lot of information. These are functioning as textbooks. And for many of you, the material will be quite new. Maybe not so much at Year 9 biblical, but in other places, the material will be very new. So they are wordy because they're there for teacher prompt, not just for the students. So I don't know about you, but when I was teaching, every year before I started a unit, I'd sit down with my PowerPoints and I'd go through them and I'd try and cut out more words every year. And that was because my confidence and familiarity with the topic was growing, and I could see more and more what I could take out and for it still to make sense for students, so that there would still be enough, especially in the higher levels where you might have students taking notes, not something that we particularly worrying too much about at Year 9. But I suggest you do this. If you find the PowerPoints too wordy and you don't want all that stuff up there, that's great. You take them out, but you need to just be sure of your own confidence and what your students need. So that's an example of the PowerPoint. It's not the whole thing, but you will see that the activities are completely integrated in with the PowerPoints, and the discussion is. So it's a whole packet. So you'll also get a teacher's pack. So the teacher's pack contains things like the content overview, suggested learning sequence. It also will contain summative assessment suggestions. So again, you do not have to go with those assessments. Some people might not want to use summative assessments. You might just want to do formative stuff. That's fine. But we have had requests for summative assessments, so there are some suggestions there. Both, you know, your old-fashioned traditional written assessment, classroom assessment, and more project-style stuff. There is a bibliography. At the moment, those are pretty short. Those two can be added to. That they mainly cover what we've used to create stuff, although not everything that we have used to write the background notes has been included there. So if you think it looks a bit brief and you're thinking, how do we know all this stuff? Well, we haven't necessarily included everything. There may be some other added material too. For example, I'm hoping to put in some vocabulary material for people who are concerned about their students' ability to understand some of the PowerPoints and some of the material. So it covers both religious education vocabulary, but also general vocabulary that might be in the PowerPoints. Sometimes we can put definitions in the PowerPoints, but sometimes that's takes up room and it's quite tricky. So that's what's in the pack, and I hope that's given you some idea of starting to plan. And now I'll turn you over to Jeanette. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, greetings to you. My name is Jeanette Tabello and I am with the NCRS. What I'm going to do is to show you some Year 9 examples of the materials that I have been working on. So I'm doing the learning packs on the theme Te Atua, God. So here we try to look at the different images of God. And to do that, we explore the life, the teachings, and the actions of Jesus, simply because we know that Jesus reveals God to us. Now, some examples of the activities that you will find in the learning pack. One is Trinity plating. Perhaps some of you have tried this activity already. This is quite interesting and a dynamic activity to do with Year 9 students. This is thinking about God in 3 ways and how the ideas are interrelated. How could different colors show the 3 different persons? So discussing the Blessed Trinity, that God is 3 and God is 1, using this activity. The other one is dancing the Trinity. And this is a very powerful activity to do, to explain the meaning of the Trinity and the different persons of the 3 persons of the Trinity. So this is creating a sequence of movements in 3s, different ways of moving together and keeping contact. And what I like about these 2 activities, dancing the Trinity and the Trinity plating, is that you can, with your students' permission, you can take pictures and you can take short video clips and have that as part of your portfolio to be displayed in the classroom or to be exhibited during your open day. And I quite like to put a computer screen running during the open day and showing some of the activities that we do in class. And also, if you have a really good picture, you can ask a student to write a reflection or an article and then put that in the school magazine. And that's a way of promoting RE in your school community. This one is a small group activity where students read some biblical text and reflect on what Jesus is saying based on what Jesus is saying about who God is based on the text. So each group is given a puzzle piece to write or to draw the image of God as described by the text. What you're looking at is the teacher's guide. So some possible answers that the students will give. So as much as possible, we try to provide answers key or marking schedule for the teacher to use. So then you can piece the puzzles together like this, and you will have about 8 different images of God from the scripture. And you might want to have a corridor around this, discussions looking at what they understand about each image and their experiences. And then you can also do a spin the wheel activity and invite students to share their thoughts, their experiences related to any of these images. Background notes. Laurel has shown us what background notes look like. So generally, they provide background information about the topic that we are to teach. They provide the Catholic perspective, the Catholic lens of the issue or the topic, and then some Catholic teachings. It can be some biblical texts or UCAT or the Catechism of the Catholic Church or some other church's documents. And where possible, we try to provide pause and reflect. So pause and reflect in the teacher's background is a great opportunity for teachers to do a little bit of reflection, to examine their own understanding, feelings and thoughts about the topic that they are about to teach. They can do this on their own, or teachers can do this with a small group of, say, for example, Year 9 teachers. When you sit together to plan for your lesson for the following week, you might want to incorporate pause and reflect. Some examples. What teaching of Jesus about God resonates with you? What are some moments or events in life that help us come to know God more personally and more intimately? And how might you teach this topic in a way that motivates students to find God in their own lives, to examine their own images of God, and to be open to new ideas about God? These are reflection questions from another learning pack, Important Teachings of Jesus. So as I have said, pause and reflect is an opportunity for teachers to examine their own faith and their own understanding of the topic that they're about to teach. And this can be done individually in your own time, or you can do this with your team in Year 9 as part of your planning. Resources, as we have mentioned, resources are mostly PowerPoint presentations, and they are key to unpacking the lesson. So what I'm showing you are examples of PowerPoint from a learning pack on the Eucharist. That the Eucharist began with the Last Supper, and that the Eucharist is a meal that nourishes and binds us together. So what we are doing here is we are trying to explain further the meaning of the words of Jesus. This is my body, this is my blood. Here we are looking at the power of the words of Jesus, the words of Jesus that transforms reality. And then you'll find teacher's notes at the bottom of every slide. And this is very helpful for you. And they are also very important in explaining further in detail the slides. They are a help, so use them, especially if you are not sure what to say, how to deepen the discussion, or how to explain the slides. The other example that I'd like to show you is a learning pack on the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. How can Jesus be present in the celebration of the Eucharist? And we say that Jesus is present in the Eucharistic species of bread and wine. And we explain that further. This is a change of the whole substance of bread and wine into the substance of the body and blood of Jesus. Now, what we do is we try to explain it in an easy way without necessarily losing or minimizing the meaning of the concept. So let's take, for example, the vase. So where I come from, we call this vase, or you might want to call this a jar. So I have this vase, you have this vase. After using this for some time, you got tired of the color and the paint, so you want to change the painting. So as you look at it, it's actually brightly painted in geometric patterns. And you want to change it into something like this. So what happens here is that the colors and the design change, but the vase remains always the same. The vase didn't change. So what I'm saying is the substance of the vase remains always the same. It did not change. A vase is a vase, and it's exactly the same vase, but the external appearances of the vase change. In other words, the substance did not modify, but the species or the appearances, the design and the color change. Then another example is the scooter. So you bought this scooter from the op shop and you really like it because it's quite cool and cute, but you don't like the color, yellow. It's very childish. So you want to change it, you want to spray paint it into something like this. And we can have a bit of discussion with the students, explain what happens to the scooter. And then now try to think of your own example, and students can have some discussions and think about what other examples that they can give. And we don't want to leave it there. We want to go a bit deeper, so we can use some video clips. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. These are just short video clips that we can use to deepen the understanding and then have a bit of discussion. So what happens to the bread and wine here? What happens here is the opposite of what happened to the vase and to the scooter. So the external appearances of the vase and the scooter change, but in the bread and wine, the opposite happens. So we can look at this before the consecration and after the consecration, and then have a bit of discussion with the students. What is happening in this case, in this situation? So the external appearances of the bread and wine remain the same, the size, the color, the taste, but the substance of the bread and wine after the consecration change. The bread and the wine become the body and the blood of Jesus. So, is Jesus really present in the Eucharist? Definitely, we say yes. So the real presence is an important teaching of our church, and Jesus himself said it. This is my body, this is my blood. And he declared that truly he is present. And this is my last slide. This is another pause and reflect for the students. So this is the time when, after the activities, after the discussion, and after your short teacher talk, we can seize the moment and throw in some questions to help the students develop the habit of reflection and also to develop critical thinking, and most especially to link the lesson to their own life experiences and hopefully to make meaning for themselves. So it's good to do this. So some examples: which part of Jesus' life do you wonder about, feel more curious, most familiar, or somewhat able to relate to? How can knowing Jesus inspire or influence my life? Jesus was a wise and selfless leader of his time. What are some qualities or values of Jesus that present and future leaders need? This is an example of pause and reflect from a learning pack on the highlights of Jesus' life. Okay, Kapai, thank you so much. That's all I have for you now. And feel free to email us if you have some questions, confusions, you have some doubts, you're not happy, or you are happy, or you're excited about this curriculum. Thank you, and God bless us all.